right, before I move on from the World Cup, it is penalties at the FIFA World Cup 2022 in the quarterfinals between Croatia and Brazil. We'll give you the results a little bit later on the channel. Meanwhile, 3 South African franchises will enter new territory this weekend when they take to the field in the opening round of the European Champions Cup competition. The Sharks, they clash with English side the Harlequins in Durban. The Stormers open their campaign with a away tie in France against Clermont Auvergne, while the Bulls host French outfit Lyon at Loftus Stadium. South African outfits are definitely excited about the opportunity to test themselves against top European teams. Joining us now to discuss this is sports journalist Lehlonolo Ditshego. Lehlonolo, a very good evening to you, and thank you so much for your time this evening. The Champions Cup, I mean, it is essentially, it's said that it's the biggest club competition in world rugby. How much of a thing, how much of a spectacle is it for South African sides to be part of this competition?
Good evening, Wishe, and thank you so much for having me tonight. And yeah, good evening to the viewers as well. This is a scratch in a foreign surface. When the South African teams left Super Rugby, the question was, who else to play now? They had to maintain that standard, and then URC was introduced. The competition didn't really take off as they expected, but at the later stages, we started seeing real contests happening in the URC. And then now, what's next after URC? Here comes the Champions Cup. This is most probably every player's dream to compete in, is the highest standard before international rugby. So I think for the South African teams to now compete in this competition, it means now they're testing new surfaces, and then now they're going to be a lot more equipped when it comes to the higher pressures of the game, with representing the Springboks and winning silverwares for their unions. We have strong unions with a lot of depth, so this competition is one that will actually test how these teams, how strong they are. Sharks, Bulls, and Stormers impressed in the URC last season. Cheetahs and EP didn't do really well in the Pro 14, but hopefully these 3 franchises in the Heineken Cup, they will make South Africa proud and compete to the highest level that this competition comes with.
Yeah, you mentioned the Sharks there, and they are one of the stronger unions in South Africa, but they've had a really tough time. Recently changed coaches, or at least fired their coach, Sean Everett, with the director of rugby now taking over that role, at least for the interim. They take on Harlequins tomorrow. It is a step up for the Sharks from the URC. Do you think they'll manage?
Definitely. There's a lot that has been happening at the Sharks. A lot of new players arrived. There was a question if Everett is fit enough to head this team, having failed in the URC. And now Sharks putting on Kolisi there, Jaden Hendricks, Eben Edzebeth. Those are Springboks who are on form. Edzebeth is one of players who, first of all, experienced longevity in the rugby fraternity. He's on form as well. So they will be looking to really shut down the noise that is happening. They are the host, and then they are facing a really tough side. Queens is a phenomenal team. They have Andre Estesen there, who also in the early stages of his career played for Sharks. So, and Velkolu as well. So they will be in a situation where they have to prove to everyone that this is not only a star-studded team that will not compete. They have pressure from that point of view. So they really need to put up their socks and give all their best when they take field against Queens tomorrow. But the standards, player to player, if you match the 2 teams, they do stand a chance to win. But the way they've played recently, it gives some kind of doubts in going to this game. But considering the URC as a competition, this is a step up Heineken Cup. But South African teams now come from wins in their last matches at URC, so that is a boost in confidence for them, and also bringing in the captain Kolisi in the mix, then that's more boost there. So they will give Queens a contest.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that pound for pound, the Sharks are more talented than their opponents coming into this match, but also a different sporting calendar now for South African rugby players. Usually it would wrap up after the end of the year tour, and then they'd sort of wait for the Super Rugby competitions to get underway and Currie Cup and that. But now they play throughout the December period. Do you think that might play into the Europeans?
It's going to be a tricky calendar for South African franchises, having to contest in internationals and then the URC and then the Heineken Cup. For the teams in Northern Hemisphere, the calendar suits them much better than the South African sides. For us, this side, it will test the depth in our teams. It will also test the how can you cope in such pressures. So it is one calendar that maybe in the future they have to re-look it. If these teams will continue competing in the Heineken Cup for furthermore 10 to 20 years, they will need to re-look the calendar and then maybe put it in a first stage that there's at least a break in between the calendars as well as the domestic cups that obviously happen at the same time. So there will be less breaks in between, but the teams need to cope. The calendar is something that they really need to look at it. It was almost a similar situation with URC last season, with teams playing Currie Cup and URC at the same time, and you seen teams having 5 players that played in the Currie Cup during the week, and then now in the mix in the URC over the weekend. So those conditions will test their depth as well as the conditions in the player conditioning.
Yeah, speaking about conditions, the defending URC champions, the Stormers, are at a very cold Clermont this weekend. They're unlucky to draw their away game in the opening round. But what do you make of the Stormers and their chances to perhaps do the double?
This is, if you look at the franchise in South Africa, this is the one team on form. 3 matches now unbeaten. And in their side, they have experienced, Heineken Cup experienced players. Stephen Kitsoff, they played there. Joseph Durba played there. Dion Fourie competed there, as well as Brock Harris. They know the conditions and the pressure that comes with this competition. So they will definitely, and they're playing away. So it's another thing for them. Debut competition away from home in tough conditions. At France, we saw what happened in the autumn series with the Springboks. So I think Stormers stand a chance to win away and maintain their unbeaten run, but it will not come easy if you look at Clermont. They are a very formidable side, and they are hungry to put in some silverware and much contest, especially in the highest union competition that is the Champions Cup. So for Stormers, no doubt that they will play good. Coach John Dobson really put the team into levels that no one expected. If you look at last year when they started URC, no one thought the Stormers would finish as one of the top 2 teams, and they went on to win it. So for the Cape Townians, I have hope in them, and talent-wise, it's no doubt. Kitsoff is a phenomenal player. They have players that can really play under immense conditions.
Absolutely. And finally, Lehlonolo, the Bulls fielding what seems to be a second-string side for their opener tomorrow. But I want to focus on the Cheetahs. They finally get another go at the international rugby stage. How important is it for that franchise?
Cheetahs, a great union, first of all. They went through so many hardships. Now they are back at top-class rugby. So they will look to build on from where they left off in the Guinness Pro in the 2020-2021 season, finishing 4th, winning 6 out of their 13 games in that conference log. So they have also experienced and talented players. They are led by Franz Steyn. He's a phenomenal player. But if you now shift things to the EPCR Challenge Cup, it's a different ball game. But I think with the courage that they have, they will look to re-establish themselves in top-class rugby on a really good note, not going there and then giving the game away. Just to touch on Bulls, I'm very worried about the team there, the squad. I looked at it, I was like, are we playing Curry Cup now? What is going on? But you know, Bulls are one of the innovators of SA rugby. You never really predict well. That is Jake White. You cannot predict him very well. There's the shocking starting lineup as well. Bernard van der Linde, he won the Varsity Cup with Tuks this season. Now he gets slotted in Heineken Champions Cup debut. So that will be a really interesting game to watch.
Absolutely. Lehlonolo Ditshego, thank you so much for your time.